All right. Hello, everyone who's in attendance. Good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you may be in the world. Welcome to the Ask the Team session with a number of folks here from Azure App Service. I'm just going to run through a couple of quick just intro points. So sort of what to expect is we'll do a quick round of intros for myself and other folks from the team who are here. And then after that, we'll basically go right into open Q&A. There is it's text-based questions that you can submit to us, and then we'll see them, sort of figure out who can answer them, read them back, and then we'll go out and talk to the answers. And then, as time passes, eventually we'll just close up on about an hour or so. That should be the session. So like I said, there's a chat box there where you can post in your questions. It can be anonymous or not. On our end, there's a few of us who will see them. And like I said, we'll publish them back out using the tool we've got and then answer them. And then again, once you see them published out, feel free to upvote questions that are of interest. I can tell you from the session we did yesterday, sometimes there can be a lot more questions than there are like folks in time to answer. But what we have done offline is taken a copy of all of them, and I'll touch on it a little bit later on. We'll have a blog post out on the App Service blog where we keep at least a lot of the higher answered or asked questions posted there and provide answers. So the session is recorded, right, just as usual, right, pretend this is a build or an ignite, just, right, have good etiquette, adhere to the code of conduct, which I'll put up here, and then also I'll just drop the code of conduct here into the chat real quickly. And beyond that, we can go ahead and move into intros. So real quick, just introing myself. Hello, everyone. I'm Stefan Shakow, one of the many program managers who works on Azure App Service. And so along with a number of other folks here from the team, we'll be taking your questions and answers this evening or again, morning, afternoon, wherever you are. So Andrew, I am going to switch over to you and have you intro yourself.
Hi, my name is Andrew Westcott, Program Manager on Azure App Service. Been with the team for heading towards 6 years. I predominantly own hybrid scenarios, so the distant past Azure Pack websites, App Service and functions on Azure Stack Hub, Windows containers in mainstream App Service, and various other bits and pieces.
Okay, cool, thanks. Byron, I'm going to switch it over to you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Byron Tardif, PM with the team pretty much since the beginning. So that's over 10 years now. I own all of the UI pieces for Azure App Service, as well as Azure Functions and the newly announced Azure Static Web Apps. I own the Linux workload, so everything that's running on Linux, be it bring your own code, bring your own containers, as well as the CLI PowerShell experience for App Service.
Cool, thanks. Jason, I will, shift it over to you. And don't forget to unmute.
We can't hear you.
Okay. Well, Jason is one of the PMs on our team. We'll let him work through the technical difficulties, and I will move it on over to Christina.
Hi, I'm Christina Compi. I work in the Azure App Service team on all the networking features, hybrid connections, VNet integration, the app service environment, and been around for a few years with the product.
All right, thanks, Christina. And I see Yutong, you just hopped on, so go ahead and intro yourself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Yutong. I'm a PM on the App Service team, and I own the certificates and domains area and also the area for Azure Monster integration.
All right, cool, thanks. So yeah, we got a good lineup of folks who work across a lot of the different areas. So we got a few questions in already. I'll tell you what, Christina, I'm gonna hop back over to you, and if you can take the question, it's a pretty familiar one. Is there a time frame for private endpoint support to go GA and become available? One of our most favorite questions.
Yeah, I never get that question. So private endpoints is in preview in 2 regions right now, East US and West US 2. And in a couple weeks, it'll be in preview in all the regions. I don't have a date yet for GA because we need some time in preview. It'll either be quick without any changes required in June, or it could be out as far as August, September, depending on what we have to do. So.
All right, cool, thanks. So popping back up to the top, Byron or other folks, I don't know if anyone has context. So there's a question here: is what's the status of EasyAuth with .NET Core 3.0 and App Service?
So I can take a stab at that one. And as far as I know, this is working across the board. We've tested it on Linux, and there was some recent improvements that we did on Linux that literally just went out with the build release to support WebSocket connections through EasyAuth as well. So unless there's something specifically not working for your scenario, please let me know. But other than that, it should be fully supported and working.
All right, cool. Thanks, Byron. I'll tell you what, I'll shift over to myself for the next one I see, which is, will there ever be an ability to transfer files from one app service to another without relying on FTP or an external server desktop? So just to see if I'm sort of guessing right, if it's sort of referring to, hey, I have, like app foo already deployed, and I sort of want to magically mutate it and copy all of its files over to like application bar. You are right today. It's a bit of a do-it-yourself exercise, and we'll typically say do something like CI/CD to go deploy, or to your point, connect to one FTP endpoint, deploy files. Now connect to the next FTP endpoint, right? Rinse and repeat. With that said, there are some things we have cooking. Typically, it's been on the back burner, which is a way to sort of take an app and its content and say, in essence, make a second and a third or an nth copy of it, because it is becoming certainly a very common scenario where folks stand something up and they either want just more instances to scale out in a region or across regions, things like that. So I'd say, I think, yes, there will be an ability. I don't have a time frame that I can give you that it's in the next month or two, but it is very much, shall we say, a thing that comes up and again, and I think you will see that eventually show up in the service. So great question. Byron, do you want to take the question I see here about static web app, just because I know you've been working on it? Okay, so I'll shift it over to you. And then I'll read it out while the video is switching. So it's saying, with the introduction of the static web apps, which was just announced yesterday, does it need to be a separate app service plan, or can we host it as a separate web app on an existing app service plan?
So the answer to that is, if you're using static web apps, there's actually no app service plan for you to see and manage as a customer. You just see the static web app resource, and that's it. Underneath the covers, it happens to be using an app service plan, but because static web apps are geo-distributed, it ends up going everywhere, and we didn't want to basically have you manage that through the app service plan. So today, you just create a static web app, and there's no app service plan.
Yep, cool. So let's see. Next question. I have a question about app service plan pricing. So okay, I'll switch back over to me, and it says, so for Linux and Windows, pricing changes drastically. As an example, and then it sort of cut off, but I will still publish it. And I'll try to at least give a brief answer to that. You are correct. There is different pricing, as you've seen, right? If you go into the pricing calculator, for example, and just work it through, pick any region in the world, try out Windows vis-a-vis Linux, you will see a lower price point for Linux. Most straightforward thing there is, like everyone else, in essence, we do have to pay the Windows license even internally, and in large part that does represent the difference in pricing between the two. from our point of view, functionality-wise, we have actually been striving to close any kind of residual gaps between the Windows side and the Linux side of the service, and that is an intentional move on our part. Probably not surprising. A lot of you folks, if you just follow Azure all up, you know very well that just the overall number of cores grows faster on Linux on Azure, right? So that's not a surprising statistic. And so again, for us, we do want as much as possible full parity between both sides of the service. And I'd expect going forward, you'll probably continue to see that the Linux side of the service has a lower price point. Okay, so there's a somewhat long question here about app service. Just scanning through it. We're using app service a lot. Some APIs take some time to start during deployment. We can use deployment slots to hit our APIs and warm them up and swap the slots. But unfortunately, there's no such mechanism during the scale out of an app service. So if an app service scales out, okay, you're right, you get a new instance that comes into rotation. And if you're cold starting or things like that, it could run relatively slowly. Yeah, so I will publish that, and I'm going to switch over to you, Jason, because I think that's right up your alley with the worker health check feature.
Yeah, is my audio coming through? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
We can hear you.
All right. Yeah, so it sounds like whoever posted this question did their research. So like Stefan mentioned, we have a new health check feature on app service. I'll reply to this person's comments with a doc link. So we have a new API where you can set a path on your application, and then we will ping that path. And if any of your instances become unhealthy, then we will take that worker out of the rotation.
Okay. Yeah, and definitely keep an eye on that, because I think we're in the last innings of adding, the final functionality. In fact, I think it's rolling out now with like surfacing it as a metric that you can keep track of in Azure Monitor. And then also it's out there on the App Service blog, some info about access to events that we send from the platform so that you can sort of see what's going on. So like I said, if you use the feature Jason is talking about, that'll definitely help you, and you'll also definitely get some more visibility into what's going on. So let's see here. A question: is there official support for OpenID Connect in EasyAuth? I know what you're referring to. I don't actually know offhand, because I don't know that we've got anyone on the session right now that knows EasyAuth inside and out. So we'll take that down for a note to put it out on the blog when we sort of go through the summary of things. I don't seem to recall that we had formal support for OIDC, but again, I know it's certainly come up before for the folks who work with EasyAuth. Let's see, next one. All right, so it took me a little bit to read through it. So the question is, you're dealing with PCI scans for security metrics. The app's hosted in Australia and Europe. We're getting failures on the 8172 port. They're not allowing us to flag it. And you're running on P2V2. Okay. So the long and the short of it is, when you have firms go out and they're doing security scans of the public version of app service, so that's the variation that's not the app service environment, you will invariably see ports like the FTP ports. This 8172 happens to be the very old web deploy, MS deploy port, back before we started hosting it on the SCM site. And there are a couple of other ports that'll pop up. The reality is, on the public side of app service, there's not a way for you as an individual app owner to say, go turn it off. Because remember, you're running on a scale unit infrastructure that's shared by you and literally thousands of other apps, all running sort of on the same underlying infra. So from a network scan perspective, there's not a way to say, hey, for my app, contoso.com, in the public footprint, go turn off the port. What you can do is, for example, there's a feature Jason is working on where you can do things like disable, for example, FTP, so someone can't use it. There's a feature coming out relatively soon that you can disable the clear text credential support that we have on things like Web Deploy and MS Deploy, so that you can actually prove to an auditor that the only way someone could publish with Web Deploy to your app was through like an AAD secured credential. But again, the one thing you're not going to be able to do is just say turn off port 8172 on the public service. That is one of those scenarios where running on an app service environment, you can of course do that because you can put a network security group on your subnet and just kill it off, lock it down. And then I think also that scenario, you can probably get a little tighter on it, even on the public version of App Service in the future. I was wondering, Christina, offhand with Private Link, which again I know is still rolling out there in private preview. Do you know offhand like how we're going to handle things like Web Deploy to an app that's got Private Link turned on?
Yeah, you can get to the SCM endpoint over Private Link. So you can get to the web app endpoint as well as to the SCM endpoint.
But then in that world, technically the standalone 8172 port that we have hanging out in the publisher is non-functional at that point, I'm assuming.
Yeah, that wouldn't be there. You'd only have your 8443 ports. We don't have, for example, remote debug over private endpoints. We don't have FTP over private endpoints.
Okay.
But we have your HTTP, HTTPS.
Yes. Okay. So the reason why I wanted to also sort of explore that is, again, like Christina mentioned earlier, the private link functionality is just getting ready to roll out here in preview, but that will be another answer to this gentleman's question, which is in the not too distant future, you could, for example, in essence, hide your app on the public version of App Service behind a private IP address using what we call private link. And then at that point, again, a security auditing firm now would be scanning what's basically a private IP address. And in that case, these kinds of shared ports like 8172, they won't be there anymore. So that's something that will be another option that's coming here very shortly for folks.
Also, if you're in an app service environment, you could block things with NSGs and stuff like that.
Yep.
So
agreed. Okay, so let's see here. Next question, what do we got? This blog seems like a nice snapshot of App Service's infra as of 2017. And as Byron has noted, there's been a number of changes. Now as one of the authors on that. It is, let me put it to you this way, because I just published it out there for folks to see. I mean, it's a good sort of intro on sort of how things used to be put together. I don't remember the specific question that led to it on the version of Ask the Team yesterday, but I did mention that we as a service are slowly but surely switching over to VM scale sets underneath the hood in terms of sort of the fundamental unit of compute. And just to this gentleman's question, that does mean that although from a high level, the way things hang together will still sort of be like what's in this article, anything that's sort of talking about cloud services or how those are put together, that will actually all change to a much more efficient way of how VM scale sets are used underneath the hood. But certainly from a high level, things like what's a front end, what's a worker, you know, do we have a back end management database with state information? All that stuff is still, it's still even relevant to this day. Okay, so all right, so I see Greg here did a follow-up on the question from a few minutes ago about the file transfer question. So okay, so the deal is you've got files like in a production slot and non-production slots, and you're looking for a way to be able to move files around between the different slots. Okay, I can see the scenario. Jason, offhand, has that ever come up before, just sort of in general scenarios you've seen for deployment slot usage?
Moving them between slots, I haven't seen that quite as much. Usually I see slots used for CI/CD into a slot. So if you have a branch for each slot, that's pretty common, but no.
Okay.
Sure.
Reading between the lines, we've been talking of the slot copy feature. Maybe that's what this is getting at.
Could be, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in this case, right, they're talking about WordPress Drupal, and so of course, right, there's once you're running a blog/CMS-like engine, as it were, of course, right, file content's getting generated onto the file system by those products and those sites, and so I can see the fact that if you're using it in like slot foo, and now you want to move to slot bar, you're like, well, I actually need that content. You know, how to put it, you want to do the swap, but you also want the content to be in what was now the swap slot. So that's the thing. Other than the copy feature, which I don't think we have that quite yet. I don't know of any other slick way beyond what you suggested, which is you have to use FTP to sort of copy the files around.
Well, the other alternative is bring your own storage and have the user-generated content be in the attached storage,
share. Yeah.
Which doesn't swap. So basically, you're swapping bits, but you're not swapping content.
Okay, so that's, yeah, so Byron is referring to the bring your own storage feature. With that said, as I recall, that's still technically in preview, and I know we're working to GA it, but I don't know. Yeah.
It's in preview for Linux, and we don't have it in Windows, even though we're working towards getting to it.
Yeah, so to sort of summarize everything, what you're doing right now, Greg, in terms of using FTP, at least for the near term, definitely you're going to have to keep on doing it. There may be a better way once we get to the point that the bring your own storage feature gets to GA status on Linux. So stay tuned. And that similar feature we are looking at bringing over to regular Windows. And as I recall, also we do have bring your own storage for Windows containers, which is in preview as well. But okay, great. Thank you for following up on that. Let's see, here's one for you, Tong. So I'm going to switch the video over to you, Tong, and then reading out the question. So it says, I love the internal cert management for web apps. Are there plans to allow this with naked domains anytime soon?
Hi, yeah, so I'm glad to hear that you're loving the feature, but we do know that the ask for the naked domain or Apex domains have been like the biggest ask since we released it into public preview. So yes, we do have plans on supporting naked or Apex domains for this feature. We are currently working on this right now. As for an ETA, we still don't have any dates to be able to provide, but please be rest assured that we are getting into this one.
Cool. Yep, great. Thank you, Yutong. Yeah, and probably as folks would expect, right, that was, I think, the #1 asked feature the second we announced the preview iteration back at Ignite. So yeah, rest assured we are absolutely working on it. So we have a question here about static web apps. Also, I think I saw a few more. Full disclosure, we'll do our best to try to address the questions on static web apps. I admit the folks who directly work on it are not on the session here with us this evening. But so we have a question here. How does static web apps achieve a global distribution without a CDN? And then Byron, do you want me just to let you speak to that question?
Yeah,
okay.
I can speak to that. So when I said that Azure App Service apps are globally geo-distributed, what we're using underneath the covers is the fact that App Service exists in every region of Azure. So when you create the app behind the scenes, we're doing all of the magic to basically hook up the equivalent of an App Service plan that is going to be running on several of those regions. I don't know exactly if it goes everywhere or if it does it on demand as traffic is coming in. So with that, we achieve like the quasi CDN, if you will, because you end up being in over 20 different regions around the world. And then there's plans, before we get the static web apps to GA to actually have integration with Azure CDN, which is a proper CDN.
Okay, cool. Thank you, Byron. Let's see. So there is another question here that is sort of topical on the static app. So the question is, I have an Angular 9 web app talking to web API endpoints on app service. Can I move the Angular app to static web apps? And what would be the ROI for doing so? So I think, let me put it this way. I think it definitely sounds like it could be a good fit for you. Definitely the architectural intent of the static web apps feature is make the static apps feature the best place just to handle pure static content. And then they've made it easy currently to be able to call APIs hosted in functions. But again, there's nothing that constrains you to that. So absolutely, you can have web API endpoints on app service. I mean, you can have them running anywhere, raw VMs, Kubernetes, you name it. I can't tell you anything specific because I don't have an idea on it, like specific ROI, but the scenario you're talking about is very valid. I would definitely try it out. And I think The hope would be, at least for the static portion of your app, that it would probably be more cost effective to run it on the app service static web app feature, because you don't have to be running on what are basically workers that are spun up all the time, when really, for at least the Angular part of the app, all you're doing is serving up static assets. And so it should theoretically give you a much lower price point for running that part of your application tier.
The other benefit could be probably the environments feature. So the fact that for every pull request that you're sending to your GitHub repo where your Angular app is being created, is you're automatically getting like a testing environment with that PR where you can validate the changes, and you don't have to go create the slot and do the swap and all of that stuff. So that's something that would basically accrue immediately if you start using it.
Good, good. So I see there is another question on static web apps. I'll read it out, but I don't know that any of us here knows the specific state of it. Will I be able to use Azure Active Directory B2C for static web apps authentication? I admit I'm not close enough to the project to know one way or the other.
There's some authentication with both Active Directory and what's the other one? Microsoft accounts, and I think they have some other providers.
Yeah.
But I don't know exactly what is the mechanism, if it's using B2C or if it's using something else. But there is a way to secure routes and specific aspects of your app to be locked down behind authentication.
Okay. Let's see. So next question or statement, there's been a lot of talk about AKS in the keynote, but app service is going to continue to be an investment. So I'm going to be completely sarcastic and say, no, tonight's session is the last investment. Okay, I'm out. No, I joke, I jest. Plus, it's late here on the West Coast of the United States. Yeah, rest assured, app service is most certainly not going anywhere. There is a heck of a lot of investment in it that's been going on. For example, Christina, if you've been at a number of her talks, even at Ignite late last year, right, there's a lot of work planned going on right now for real in terms of next generation ACE. Everything we've been rolling out this year, right? We did regional VNet integration for Windows, regional VNet integration for Linux is very late in the preview cycle, getting a lot closer to GA. Yutong, for example, has been doing a lot of work on the log analytics integration, both for Linux and now also for Windows. And basically the list goes on and on. So believe me, there's no shortage of work and features that all of us deal with every day on the team. Yeah, there's certainly no shortage of investment or continued innovations going on in the platform. I think just where we are today, calendar-wise, the first half of this year has all been about just getting the networking investments really amped up. And as counterintuitive as it sounds, and I've mentioned this in a lot of venues, we want folks who today might feel like they have to go into app service environments to feel like they can actually satisfy the scenarios on the public version of app service, because we want it to be simpler and a lower price point as much as possible for folks. So yeah, definitely relevant question. We get asked it a lot, but yeah, don't worry, app service is most certainly here and growing. Let's see, next question. I'm going to shift this over to you, Jason, because it's asking, are there any plans or improvements for the slots feature that we have now?
Yeah, it's a good question. And actually, Andrew and I were just talking about this earlier today. So the basic feature will definitely stay as it is, but there are certain improvements we want to make to the process of warming up the sites as you're swapping over from one to the next. I've also published some more explicit guidance on how to use the feature more effectively, which I think will be helpful for a lot of users. But yeah, we definitely want to work on how the applications are warmed up for those, or excuse me, how the instances are warmed up for those apps, because we know that a lot of users have given us feedback for that.
Okay, cool, thanks. Okay, so there's a somewhat in-depth pricing question. Realistically, this probably isn't the greatest format for being able to address it, but I'll sort of try to summarize it. How do you explain pricing inconsistency between app service plan tiers? And again, here I'll publish it, highlighting some pricing for, it looks like P1 V2 for Linux, and then the Linux S2 tier. And then similarly, tiers over on Windows. Like I said, this is probably not the greatest form to go into it, but as I mentioned earlier, it is sort of intentional that across the price waterfall, that Linux app service comes in at a lower price point than Windows. And then also part of it is just when different features lit up. So for example, if I look at Linux, and you can see, right, the P1 V2 tier comes in at a more attractive price point, even on Linux relative to the S2. Part of that is it's intentional, not so much like on my part or those of us on the call, but pricing wise, because the PV2 underneath the hood is today, it happens to be implemented in terms of DV2 compute, which from a very high level, to put it like Azure wise, we would rather folks be on that versus, for example, some of the older AV2, which is what underlies a lot of the standard tier. And so again, it's not something we directly control, but what will frequently happen is folks will make pricing changes to try to incentivize folks to use the newer hardware as it becomes available. And then again, there's a bunch of hand waving around like, well, if a service like Windows has been around longer, sometimes they won't necessarily double back and do all the bookkeeping to readjust the pricing on those products. Having said that, case in point on our service, we are looking, probably not surprisingly this year, at bringing in new SKUs, both across isolated and premium. And I suspect you will probably continue to see examples where we bring in new SKUs and some of the new hardware at more attractive price points than the pre-existing ones. And I think also frequently you'll see a similar approach that goes on even in the infrastructure as a service world. Okay, I'll publish the question on the static apps global distribution, but skip over that because I think that's been at least addressed reasonably well so far. So let's see here. I have a question. Are you planning to update to Windows Server 2019? Andrew, I will switch over to you if you can speak a little bit to that.
So we already have 2019 in place already for the container hosts that we use for Windows containers. They're running an LTSC release of Windows 2019, so it's the RS5 if you're familiar with that moniker. What we're trying to do on that element of the service is actually get up to the SAC channel so that when a customer comes to us with a container, they don't actually have to think about which underlying base image that they've based their Windows container off. We want to get to the point where we can take anything all the way from 2016 up to the very latest investments that Windows Server put in place. We're using Hyper-V containers underneath the hood. For the mainstream Windows hosting platform that we have for your code deployments, today we're assessing what it means to actually switch over to 2019 and see where relevant. The slight challenges with something like App Service, you'll hopefully appreciate, is it's not like we're upgrading a handful of machines. We're actually upgrading quite a significant global footprint around the world. So we need to validate every single one of our features is not going to be deprecated by something coming in a 2019 SKU. It's on the backlog. We don't actually have a date for it yet, but we are looking at that in amongst some of the work that we're also doing on enabling additional SKUs. If we can get it in, then we will look to do it, but it's not a small piece of work. But the place that you will see 2019 is on the Windows container hosts. So that's definitely already in flight and it's already been proven. It's kind of watch this space to a certain degree. We had a question yesterday about TLS 1.3 and things like that, investments like that are being made from the Windows Server team will become, to a certain degree, a forcing function on what OS that we run underneath the hood that we'll have to make decisions.
Okay.
And just in case anybody's interested on the Linux side of the house, we are in the process of moving the fleet to underlying Ubuntu 18.04 with the plans to move to 20.04 next year.
All right, cool. Christina, I'm going to switch over to you because I see there are a couple of questions on VNet. So I see, can a private link enabled app be removed from public DNS? And then I'll scroll through and look for a few others because there was a question about using private, basically private DNS with private link.
So to answer the question, we are looking at eventually removing the app out of public DNS once it has private link enabled. That's not the way the feature is right now, and probably won't be enabled for that for GA, but it's definitely on the backlog. So.
And then, yeah, that was the other thing. Do you have an ETA for VNet integration, Azure DNS private zone support, which is basically asking a similar thing a slightly different way?
Well, if you want to have Azure DNS private zone support, you could do that now with the configuration with the regional VNet integration capability. So that's in docs. I can drop the link. Right now, you got to set it up with a couple app settings, but in sometime over the summer, it'll be something you don't need app settings to be configured for. We'll have an API to route all your outbound traffic into your VNet, and also the ability to use the Azure DNS Private Zone endpoint will be built directly into product, and you don't have to set anything.
All right, cool. So let's see, question here, what's the progress of the premium V2 update on the old app service plans? Some of the plans I haven't made it changeable yet. Yep, great question. You know, not something that's immediately obvious, but slowly but surely over the last, gosh, probably now it's been 9 months. We've been going back through the entire fleet of app service and slowly but surely retrofitting, as we say, our earlier scale units with support for PV2. Probably not surprisingly, right, with what came up with coronavirus, a lot of those retrofit plans were basically temporarily, and it's only temporarily tabled. Since we've made it to the other side now, we have picked up again, and we're starting to do that. So again, I know the engineers who work on that, they've been slowly enabling yet more of the earlier scale units with PV2. I admit I don't have like a precise schedule, but is very much so still a goal of us on the service to be able to get as close as possible to going through 100% of the earlier footprint on app service and getting PV2 available. So if nothing else, just check periodically, and I think eventually we'll get to the point that you'll be able to use it and switch some of your apps over. Here's one for you, Byron, so I'll switch over to you. It says, so web app currently supports many runtime stacks natively, and you can use a Docker container for other stacks, but are there plans to add native Go support? And Control-Shift-M.
Sorry. There's no immediate plans to support Go. I think the only new stack that we're currently considering as an experiment is Dino. So the basically the ramp up of the new Node stuff. But honestly, it comes down to the adoption that we have for a particular stack needs to justify the investment to support it. I'm looking at what can we do to basically enable experimental workloads in a way that it doesn't mean that we need to ramp up a whole support team to support that, but there's nothing in the short term.
Okay, cool. So I'll switch back to me just for a sec, because I'm just scanning through the questions and see what we got. Okay, so here's an interesting one. Where does ACE fit into the landscape once private endpoint goes GA? It seems that private endpoint would satisfy a lot of typical isolation requirements without needing the cost of an ACE. Christina, do you want to take that one, or I mean, I can
Sure.
always. Okay, I'll switch things over to you.
So private endpoints is great for enabling your app to have a private endpoint in your virtual network. The ACE is a system, a single tenant system that runs in your virtual network. So the benefit there is you could apply network security around the entire environment that your apps are in. It's again a single tenant system. When you're in the multi-tenant service, you can choose to have your app exposed on a private endpoint or on a public endpoint. And that uncertainty and having that at the app level is really the difference, on what you need. If you need an entire system that you could apply external security, then the ACE is going to be a great bet. If you're really around trying to have provide isolated network access more than anything else, then you could totally take advantage of the features in the multi-tenant service. It really comes down to what do you need, and what are your security reviewers going to look for.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
So I'll go publish this one out. There's a little bit of a discussion going on with the release of the .NET 5 preview. Are we going to see any app service plans with .NET 5 on them? And then, yes, so Byron's been replying. He's sort of our ringmaster these days of how we manage the influx of new stacks. One of the folks on our team, Jeff, published a blog not too long ago just to sort of give an example and prove we can run it. More generally, just following up on that, I know .NET Core 3.1 took substantially longer, shall we say, than we had really ever intended to struggle through to get it up on our service. That was not our original intent. It's sort of like a number of environmental issues kept on coming in one after the other. But for .NET Core 5.0, so like I suspect what we'll probably end up doing is we'll make the push to get it out there when it's GA. I admit it. I don't know at this early juncture if they have like a late preview, if we would actually go through and formally push that out on app service. So that might still be a case of bring your own framework, but definitely we're going to be tracking the GA and it's the intent to do a faster turnaround on lighting it up on the service when we get closer to that point. So looking through a few of the other questions, okay, how will static web app paid plans be differentiated? I'll publish the question, and yet, like Byron said, it's really early days. It's not something that we necessarily really know how to answer. Okay, and right, so yeah, so there's some more discussion on the pricing. Acknowledge that. Some more feedback on the user-generated files. So yeah, again, that's good. For a lot of this information, it's great. The questions that folks are asking us, because like I said, we'll copy it down off to the side and definitely be able to keep this in mind when we're looking at both the slots feature as well as bring your own storage. So thank you for that. Let's see. Here's one about the custom domains. So the question is, you are now using the custom domain verification ID for verification when adding a custom domain. Why did you make this change? Great question. I'll publish it out here. Yutong, do you want to field that, or I can?
Yeah, I can do that.
Okay, I'll switch the video on over to you.
Okay. So the reason why we had to switch, or not, the reason why we decided to introduce this new custom domain verification ID is because in the past, there have been issues of a dangling CNAME issue, whereas, for example, as a customer, I created a web app and then I ended up deciding having a CNAME pointing to my web app a.azurewebsites.net. And what happens is that after I delete my web app, there are some actors who eventually find out about this info, and they are able to create the same web app and use the same domain, given that the DNS record hasn't been updated. So in order for us to tackle the security issue, we had to introduce this new custom domain verification token, just so we can prevent this from happening in the future again. And it's more of like for us making sure that our adding up of our custom domains is a more secure process than it was before.
Okay, yep, thanks. Also, I mean, another benefit we get out of that is, and keep me honest here, Yutong, I believe the verification ID right now that gets issued is associated with the subscription for the site. And that does mean that it should actually be a bit more deterministic if you want to set up a second and a third and an nth copy of an app and reuse the same custom host name to app binding. Because once you put that verification ID into your domain, as long as you're creating subsequent apps and binding the same host name that you already set up in your zone, we'll already see that you've got this this ID token sitting in your zone, assuming you didn't delete it, and it just automatically pass the verification. So that is also one of the nice side effects of it. With that said, we still do support the pre-existing mechanisms, and we will for a while. So it's not like you're going to wake up tomorrow and find out, like, if you already had custom domains set up, that suddenly you need to switch to the new system. This is just sort of the first part to be able to roll it out, roll out the new sort of more authenticated, secure way of doing it and get it out there. Okay, so let's see, scrolling through, because again, I see there's some active discussions on the side, which is great. Let's see. Are there, here's one. So are there milestones for supporting gRPC? So that question, it comes up quite a bit with with App Service today. So let me put it this way: in the near term, there isn't going to be anything new, like in the next 2 or 3 months, that's going to magically enable the full gRPC scenario. We do support HTTP 2.0 on the service, but with the caveat that we terminate the HTTP 2.0 connection on our front ends. And as I recall, one of the challenges with some aspects of gRPC is effectively you need to ensure you have HTTP 2 plumbed through all the way to the workers. So like I said, in the super near term, that's not going to change, but we are very much so aware of the scenario. Definitely we see the ask come up, and I am reasonably hopeful that as time passes, that we'll have a better solution for that. Okay, so again, I see some discussions on some troubleshooting, which again, it's certainly fine to ask us, but realize again, I apologize, this isn't necessarily the cleanest venue for doing some of this. Let's see, are there any plans to review how the routing of traffic within an auto-scaling app service works? I've been advised that this is done in a round-robin fashion. We've been seeing performance degradation during scale up and down. Okay, yeah, and let me actually go publish that question so folks see that. Yeah, so one thing I'm going to assume when you're saying scale up, scale down, that really you mean you're increasing or decreasing the number of workers that are available. If it happens to be that scenario, the worker health check feature that Jason was referring to earlier should help with that, because what will end up happening is when we add a new instance, if you've got the worker health check feature turned on, we will not route traffic to that instance until it actually starts giving us basically a good 200 result on it. And that is specifically meant to help address that scenario of, you're scaling out and in, and we know that there's, potentially the issue with cold starting apps. Also, part of the intent behind that worker health check feature is it works for both Windows and Linux. So again, I know for some folks who may have been using the service for a while, on the Windows side of it, there's a more involved feature set with something called app init that you can use. But if you're on the Linux side of the house, it's sort of like, well, okay, that's not particularly useful. So that's why, again, you'll hear myself, Jason, others always talking about the worker health check feature for this scenario, because it's built at a higher level up in our front doors, and it works regardless of whether you're on Windows or Linux.
And we have UI for that coming within the next month or so.
Excellent, excellent, great. Okay, so again, scroll through, we'll look at the questions here. How soon will the Apex domain for static web apps be available? So I'm just going to publish that just so folks see the questions. That's one of those things, again, my apologies, we're all pretty much on the web app side of App Service. So other than Byron, we're not directly working on the static apps feature. With that said, I'm going to hazard a guess that they will probably be able to support it roughly in the same time frame that App Service with the App Service Managed Certificate feature has support for it, because I know underneath the hood, we're doing the work with the Key Vault team to basically plumb through that scenario. So I don't have like a precise time frame. It's not going to be like in a month or so, but I expect that once we get everything plumbed through, it'll light up pretty quickly for both App Service and for static apps. So you will see it. It will come eventually. Yeah,
and that's actually exactly the reason we couldn't do the Apex domain, because we couldn't generate the free cert for it.
Okay. Yep. So let's see here. I see again in some of the questions, there's a statement here, hey, we're reviewing our need to use ARR affinity, but the performance lag is causing some friction regarding whether to have it enabled or disabled. Would be interesting to hear from us, sort of our opinions on using the session state affinity feature in App Service. Anybody want to hop in on that? It's a pretty general question.
It comes down to whether your application is stateful really, and whether you really must have it. If your application workload is not reliant on being sent back to the same worker every time for state persistence and management, then we'd advise to to disable that on your application and use the benefits of us being able to just route as and when required. If your session state's actually been, your application state, your session state's been managed over in, say, Redis or some other similar caching mechanism, then we advise you disable that capability.
Yeah, and also, I mean, I'll throw in my 2 cents worth. I admit that sometimes when we get escalations from customers looking to run at really high scale, it's almost one of the de rigueur questions we ask them is we say, hey, do you have that ARR affinity feature turned on? If you do, please turn it off unless there's like some compelling reason in your app that you need it. So I can't tell you like quantitatively that that's always going to sort of help smooth out performance, but definitely if it helps the conversation for your team, like I said, for high scale workloads, it's one of the common things on the checklist just to say, look, turn it off because you probably don't need it.
Yeah, keep in mind that the ARR affinity is gonna, if you have 100 requests coming in, and you have only one instance, all those 100 are going to be affinitized to that one instance. So adding a second instance does not automatically transfer the request over. So what you end up with is one overloaded worker and one worker not doing anything until new requests come in. So that's the reason for doing that.
Yep, makes sense. Let's see here. There's a question on using custom domains on multiple apps might or might not work, depending if they are on the same scale unit. Any improvements planned for this? So yes, there's hopefully a number of different approaches. One of them, again, is it's a feature that's sort of been on again, off again on our backlog. But basically, there is some work going on to try to be more intentional to say, hey, I have an app. Can you, app service, go create for me the second and the third and the fourth copy in the same region? And in fact, as I recall, I believe the cloning feature, if you happen to satisfy all the requirements, and I think you have to use it from the command line, can actually do that for you. But I know Yutong's working with some of the engineers on sort of a newer feature that would sort of have first-class support for the concept of I have an app, and I'd like to create more copies of it. And in essence, we, underneath the hood, will do the right thing and automatically spread you out on different scale units so that when you subsequently try to bind the host name, it'll work and you won't get this oddball error saying, oh, sorry, you can't bind the host name because it's already in use. So that's one thing that's already in progress. There is actually a feature which I think we've got enough runtime on it, and probably we can get it docked out in the blog here in the not too distant future. There is a way actually API wise, either using ARM or the examples we've got uses a tool like ARM Client, where you can explicitly create app service plans and you can tell us, the platform, please spread it out in essence in a way that you land on different scale units. And again, that enables and unlocks the scenario of I need to create a second and a third and an nth copy of my app in the same region, and you don't want them to collide by ending up on the same scale unit. So like I said, it's that feature we haven't really publicized because we wanted to sort of get it tested out. But I think we're at the point that we know it works. And so I'd say keep an eye out on our blog. And again, I've got the blog link here that we'll show in a little bit because when we talk about it, we'll post it out there as well. So let's see, scrolling through some other things. Okay, so we have a requirement to publish events whenever certain activities are completed on a web app. Basically, what's the best technology that integrates well with this? Jason, since you've been answering, do you want me to shift that over to you?
Yeah, sure thing.
Okay.
So yeah, this is an interesting one, quite topical too. So if you want to emit events and handle them with an Azure service like a function or a logic app, then Event Grid works great. You can use functions, logic apps, webhooks, hybrid connections, the list goes on. So you can emit those events from your application code or from other Azure services, and then you can consume those with the things I mentioned earlier to do whatever it is you need to do at that point. And an Event Grid is very performant. It's a great pub sub service. And I'm going to comment on this question with a great article that also breaks down the different Azure messaging services, the pros and cons of each and their use cases. So yeah.
Okay,
good question.
Cool. So let's see here. I've got a question. I don't know that we've got anyone who knows the specific answer. They're asking, is there a plan to make the Key Vault reference feature in app settings accessible via service endpoint over private link? And I think probably that's my guess is, just to paraphrase, you're asking like, hey, I have an app running on app service. I set up, for example, a Key Vault reference, but you want to lock down the Key Vault itself with a service endpoint and basically securely connect to it. Christina, do you know offhand the answer for that scenario?
Yeah, there's a few of these features that don't work directly with VNet integration and service endpoints or private endpoints, and we are investing to clean that up so that you will be able to eventually use like backup and restore or Key Vault references or MI across your VNet integration. But there's a few of these features that are not implemented directly on the worker where your apps are hosted that, you know, for now, that's just state of the union.
Okay. Yeah, also, I mean, to follow up on that, it's a great question because it's sort of like peeling the onion. Now that private link is, I mean, it's been there on a number of other services. It's lighting up on our service. This concept of the transitive closure of, hey, can I call the private link endpoint on my app and app service, and then outbound have it call downstream services on their service endpoints, or if they're private link secured. And so getting that all wired up end to end. You are right. What you're sort of seeing is the early days of all this stuff coming online. So I expect eventually the answer will be yes, but we're not quite there yet. So I see a question here. I know Byron already addressed it, but I'll post it out there for folks. It's saying, hey, are web jobs going to stay, or will they be completely replaced by Azure Functions? And like Byron said, it's a couple of things. First of all, web jobs has been on the service for so long. I think even from a procedural standpoint, it's for all practical purposes impossible for us to deprecate. So that's not something I'd worry about. I certainly remember from a lot of different conferences for folks coming up to us at the booth. It's a very common question. So it's like web jobs are definitely there. They're here to stay. I know in a lot of cases we say, hey, try to implement the scenario with functions, but I know, right, there's a lot of folks who are just like, look, I have this console exe, just go run it. And the reality is still to this day, web jobs are just an insanely easy way of doing that. I do know the functions folks are looking at saying, hey, beyond the more traditional event processing or serverless scenarios, maybe we should loop back and look at things that are more core to web jobs. And I know there's a spirited discussion on sort of like .NET Core workers and web jobs a few weeks ago. So, you know, to add to that, definitely functions folks and a few of us in app service, we continue to look at like, hey, you know, maybe there's some more functionality. We should actually push into functions just to make it a much more natural way of doing what you can do with web jobs, or vice versa. Maybe just keep web jobs as they are, but without you knowing it, sliding functions in underneath the hood.
And there's also all of the people that are moving off of cloud services worker roles, and web jobs seems to be kind of like a natural place for them to drop whatever they were doing with that.
Okay, yep, great. Okay, so I'm just taking, because also just doing a quick time check here. Technically, we are getting close to the end of the session, so I'm doing a quick scroll through of what I see here in the Q&A. And again, I apologize to the folks asking the questions. We do try to get through most of them, but it's, as you've probably seen, not the most ideal interface for the back and forth. Let's see. Okay, so there's a little bit of troubleshooting questions. We talked about the routing. Okay, great. And then we talked about the managed certs, and I see Yutong's looking at that. Okay, so there was a follow-up question like, how do you troubleshoot the uneven loading of requests? We already checked that ARR affinity is off. There are a couple of things there just off the top of my head. One is double check, make sure that there's only a single app in the app service plan. I know it's a little bit counterintuitive, but definitely we've seen scenarios where you might have 2 or more apps. They're in the same app service plan that's scaled out to multiple instances, but it turns out the different apps actually have, relatively speaking, radically different performance characteristics. And so that's one scenario, and the reason why I bring that up is that the service will look at all of the request traffic, for all of the apps in an app service plan, and we'll basically spread out the requests across all the workers, but we don't take into account any kind of asymmetry in performance between, say, app foo and app bar that happen to be running on the same app service plan. And so if there's a really big performance differential between those two, you can end up seeing uneven loading on your instances. So that's one thing that comes to mind. On the other hand, if you're just running a single app, and so it's one app service plan, bunch of different instances, realistically, if you're seeing radically different performance on different instances, I'm almost wondering, like, it feels like there's something else going on specific to the requests that were in flight on that worker. And I admit at that point, beyond doing things like, if you happen to have App Insights trying to get profiles, or realistically, it's not such a bad idea at that point to say, hey, open up a support case. We do have engineers who are very well versed in being able to say, okay, I'm going to beam into instance 14 out of 30 of your app service plan, and they can go grab like a process dump and actually see just what the heck's going on, because it's completely possible maybe there's some race condition, something like that, and it just so happens, you know, 1 or 2 out of the 20 or 30 instances end up getting in that state. So admittedly, it is a bit of a debugging exercise to go through that.
The one other thing that I can think of is on the Linux world, we're getting to the point where we can allow you to SSH into a specific instance by passing the instance ID. So then you can do things like top to look at the top processes and basically what's eating up the CPU in a specific instance.
Yep. Okay, so yeah, one quick last scan through. So yeah, it looks like everything else has at least been, for some of the deeper things, some back and forth that's been going on in a few of the questions. Like I said, offline, just for ourselves, for our own learnings, we'll take a copy of the stuff. We don't go out and like dump it all out onto our blog, but we will try to go through both from this session and yesterday's session, summarize a lot of just the higher hit count questions that come up again and again, and go summarize it out on the app service blog. Okay, so I see there was a question saying, hey, will there be like a link to this session afterwards? I admit my understanding is I believe it is recorded. I don't actually know for the build coordinators who are coordinating the whole conference how they're going to make all of this available after the fact, but I admit the best I can say is, yeah, keep an eye out for that, because I think given the fact this is all digital, the intent is to make it available online for folks. So what I'm going to do at this point is shift us back to the closing slide. So a couple of things, definitely, again, thank you everyone, whatever time it was in the world, morning, afternoon, or evening, for dropping by. I'm actually happy here. I feel like we could sort of keep up with the questions. So it was a little bit of a closer, more in sync discussion, which is great. Definitely for us, for any of your other encounters here at Build, please do submit evals. For our service, again, thank you for taking the time. I've got up here a link with just our sort of little blog where we put out a lot of different info. Sometimes, you know, what are we doing, roundups of new features that are coming out, and you can subscribe to that. Keep an eye on that. And then also some of the folks in our team have put up a recap here, both of sort of features that are available now around Build, as well as sort of a running list of common questions. We've only got a few in there that we were able to summarize from yesterday. But again, like I said, for both yesterday and for us this evening's Ask the Team event, we're going to go through, take a look at a lot of the higher hit rate questions. And so if you check back here, you know, in a week or so, there'll probably be a lot more Q&A that's also up here on the blog. So at this point, like I said, thank you again, everyone. I'm going to have us all sort of go here onto mute, and then probably in about, let's say, 35 after the hour, we'll go out and just have the folks sort of halt the stream. So thank you again, and have a good day, everyone.